Ethan Harris invited his wife's lover to dinner on a cold Friday night in late October. Not because he wanted a fight, and not because he wanted to create the kind of scene that would make the neighbors peer through their windows and whisper about it for weeks afterward. He invited that man because he had lived too long inside a house full of half-answers, phones placed face down on tables, explanations spoken too quickly, smiles appearing at the wrong moments, and he understood that if he kept questioning Laura the way a wounded husband still hoping for honesty questions his wife, she would turn the question back into his fault. Ethan's house sat in a quiet suburb west of Chicago, where people mowed their lawns on Saturday mornings, set pumpkins on their porches in October, strung white lights along their roofs in December, and greeted each other with sentences warm enough that no one had to know too much about anyone else. That night, the Harris dining room was prepared almost perfectly. The white tablecloth had been ironed until there was not a single crease left in it. 3 ivory plates were set 2 fingers from the edge of the table. Knives on the right, forks on the left, wine glasses catching the low light from the hanging fixture above. The candles were short, chosen carefully so they would not block anyone's face across the table. From the kitchen came the smell of seared steak, browned butter, garlic, rosemary, and roasted potatoes. Outside the window, the lawns slowly darkened beneath the warm porch lights, and every house around them looked peaceful, as if truth never happened in places with white fences and clean-painted mailboxes. Ethan stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled to his elbows, checking the temperature of the meat with a calmness that felt strange even to him. He was 43, the owner of a small company that designed operating systems for cold storage warehouses and logistics lines, a job that required him to see faults in things other people assumed were still running smoothly. He was used to hearing a machine hum evenly and recognizing the bearing underneath that was about to fail, used to looking at a production chart and knowing one link was slowing before it stopped the whole line. But in marriage, he had never wanted to live like an engineer searching for defects. He had wanted to trust. He had once been proud that he was not the controlling kind of husband, that he did not read his wife's messages, did not track her schedule, did not question new clothes or late nights. Laura always said she loved that about him, loved his steadiness, loved the way he didn't turn love into a prison. That night, when Ethan heard those words echo in his mind, he almost laughed. Some people praise your freedom not because they value it, but because they need it to hide their tracks. Laura was sitting in the living room, wearing a deep blue dress, her hair falling softly over her shoulders, her lips painted a faint wine red, her face held in a state of normalcy so perfect it looked rehearsed. She knew a guest was coming to dinner, because Ethan had told her that afternoon that someone from the industry would be stopping by to discuss a potential project. But when he said the name Marcus Reed, her hand had paused in midair for exactly half a second, the water glass she was holding tapping lightly against the kitchen counter with a small, sharp sound. "Which Marcus?" she asked, her voice light, almost casual. Ethan was wiping the carving knife with a cloth towel at the time. He did not look at her right away. "Marcus Reed, consultant. I think you might know him." Laura laughed, but there was not enough breath in it. "I meet a lot of people through work, Ethan." "You know that?" He knew. He knew more than she thought, but not enough yet. That was why this dinner existed. When the doorbell rang, the house seemed to inhale and hold its breath. Laura was standing near the dining table. Ethan saw her shoulders stiffen beneath the fabric of her dress. He set the towel down, walked to the door, and opened it. Marcus Reed stood on the porch, a little taller than Ethan, wearing a gray wool coat, holding a bottle of red wine, his face carrying the polite expression of a man arriving to meet a business contact and hoping to make a good impression. He had a measured kind of confidence, not showy, dark hair threaded with gray at the temples, and tired eyes that belonged to someone who had survived a divorce or a loss and taught himself how to stand straight again. "Ethan?" Marcus asked. "Marcus," Ethan said, shaking his hand. The handshake was firm, warm, nothing like a thief stepping into another man's house. And when Marcus walked into the dining room and saw Laura standing by the table, the polite smile on his face died for a fraction of a second before he forced it back to life. Laura froze too. If Ethan had not been watching her for months with the silence of a man forced to relearn how to see, he might have missed that moment. But he saw it. He saw her pupils widen, saw her hand unconsciously touch the face of her wedding ring, and then pull away. Saw Marcus look at her as if he had found an error in reality, then immediately turned back to Ethan. "I didn't know Laura would be here," Marcus said, and it was the real surprise in his voice that made something in Ethan's anger change shape. Ethan smiled, not broadly, not warmly. "Of course she's here," he said. "Marcus, this is my wife, Laura Harris." The word wife fell into the room like a glass breaking, though no one was allowed to look down at the floor. Laura opened her mouth, then closed it again. Marcus looked at her, this time unable to fully hide his shock. Ethan leaned slightly to take the bottle of wine from Marcus's hand. "Come in," he said. "Dinner's ready." 2 weeks before that dinner, Ethan saw the first message on a Wednesday night in the garage. While he was fixing the wooden shelf Laura had complained about for 3 months, because it leaned and irritated her every time she reached for holiday decoration. The garage was cold, smelling of pine, motor oil, and dust. Ethan wore an old t-shirt and jeans dusted with sawdust, a drill in his hand, listening to the sound of water from the upstairs shower because Laura had just gotten home from a client dinner that had stretched until nearly 10. Her phone was lying on the kitchen table, only a few steps from the garage door, because she had left it there when she took off her coat. Ethan had not meant to look. He was walking into the kitchen to get another screw when the screen lit up. A name appeared, M. Read client. Beneath it was the message, "I hate leaving you like that. One day we won't have to hide." Ethan stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, the screw lying in his palm, while the shower kept running upstairs like a sound from the ordinary life he had just been pushed out of. He read the sentence once, then a second time, then a third, because the human mind has a desperate way of trying to make dangerous words harmless if it stares at them long enough. "I hate leaving you like that." Maybe a client was talking about a tense meeting. "One day we won't have to hide." No, that sentence did not belong to work. It did not belong to a proposal, a budget, a marketing campaign, or any professional reason Laura could offer. It belonged to two people living in the dark and believing that one day they would step out of it. Ethan did not touch the phone. He did not unlock it, partly because the password had been changed several months earlier, Laura saying it was because of a security update after her company warned about a client data leak, partly because he still wanted to keep one small piece of honor for himself, as if not reading more would make the situation less real. He only stood there and watched the screen go dark, feeling the familiar kitchen with its cutting board, fruit bowl, and the hand towel Laura had bought at Target suddenly become strange, like a room built on a stage. When Laura came downstairs 10 minutes later, her hair wet, robe tied quickly, she saw Ethan standing near the kitchen table, his eyes still on the place where the phone had lit up. Her smile came too fast. "Work never stops, huh?" she said, picking up the phone before he could say anything. "Who is Marcus?" Ethan asked. His voice was not loud, not sharp. That was why Laura stopped, because she knew he did not ask questions like that without a reason. "A client," she said. "I told you about him. Marcus Reed. He has a downtown project. Do clients usually text you that one day you won't have to hide?" Laura looked at him for just 1 second, and then her face softened. Later, Ethan would understand that this was her most frightening skill, the ability to move from being caught to being wounded faster than anyone else could understand what had happened. "You read my message?" she asked. "It appeared on the screen, and you just stood there reading it." "I saw one line, Laura." "One line," she repeated, laughing sadly as if he had confessed something shameful. "You read one line and created an entire story." Ethan set the screw on the table. "I didn't create the line." "No," she said more softly, "but you created the accusation." The conversation moved into the bedroom afterward under the low yellow light, where Laura sat on the edge of the bed, her wet hair dripping onto her shoulder, while Ethan stood near the door like a man unsure whether he still had the right to enter. His own room. She explained that Marcus was a client going through a divorce, emotionally needy, sometimes sending messages that crossed the line, and that she had been trying to keep things professional. She said she had not wanted to tell Ethan because she knew he would overreact. When he asked why she had not blocked him if the messages were inappropriate, she replied that work was not as simple as he thought, that not everyone could cut off a major client just because he was too emotional. When he said she had hidden it from him, she asked whether he really wanted a marriage where she had to report every message. When he went quiet, she lifted a hand to her face, her voice breaking just enough. "I'm exhausted, Ethan. I work all day, and then I come home feeling like I'm being investigated because another man doesn't know how to hold a boundary. Do you know what that feels like?" He did not know how to answer. He had seen the message, but she had dragged him from the position of a man who had seen a sign of betrayal into the position of a man who might be hurting his wife by doubting her. That was how Laura won small confrontations. She did not need to prove herself clean. She only needed to make the person asking questions feel dirty. Ethan did not sleep that night. Laura lay with her back to him, sighing now and then like a misunderstood woman. The next morning, the name M. Reed, client, had disappeared from the recent messages. Ethan asked nothing. He did not ask. He went to work, sitting in his car outside the office for almost 10 minutes before going in, watching rain slide down the windshield, replaying an old voicemail Laura had left months before, her voice warm and slightly smiling. "Hey, just wanted to say I love you. Don't work too late." The words, "I love you," suddenly sounded as if they had been sent by another woman, or from another time, or from a stage where the lines were still beautiful because the audience did not yet know what was happening backstage. In the days that followed, Ethan began doing the thing he hated most, looking back over his life as if it were a chain of evidence. The past 6 months suddenly appeared full of cracks that, while living through them, he had covered over with trust. The Thursday nights when Laura had client dinners and came home smelling of perfume mixed with a strange cologne. Not strong, not cheap, but cedarwood and black pepper clinging to the collar of her coat like a very small testimony. The times she bought new clothes, tighter dresses, more expensive blouses, saying her industry required her to look sharp because her clients were becoming more high-end. The mornings she stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, wearing earrings Ethan did not remember seeing. Then when he complimented her, she said, "Thanks," while her eyes remained on her phone. The times she laughed alone at the kitchen table, and when he walked in, the smile vanished so quickly the room seemed to cool. The times he wanted closeness, and she said she was tired, said her head was full of work, said, "I need my own space," in a voice that made him feel selfish for touching her any further. Everything had once been explainable. Everyone had busy seasons. Everyone needed space. Everyone had difficult clients. Everyone could change a password for security. But beside the message, "One day we won't have to hide," those harmless pieces began arranging themselves into a shape that could not be dismissed as random. Ethan did not hire a private investigator. He did not plant a tracker. His calm was not because he was not in pain, but because the pain had gone too deep to flame on the surface. He looked up Marcus Reed through public information, LinkedIn, company website, conference posts, a few old Facebook photos. Marcus did not look like the villain Ethan wanted to hate. He worked as a consultant in commercial space design and customer experience optimization, had once owned a small company that failed after his divorce, and was rebuilding his career through boutique downtown projects. There was a 12-year-old daughter in old photos, brown-haired, wearing glasses, standing beside him at a science fair. There were posts that did not boast, did not show off, just photos of projects, books, and sometimes vague sentences. Second chances don't always look like what you expect. Finally learning that home is a person who sees you. Ethan read that and felt his stomach tight. Home is a person who sees you. He knew that voice. Not Marcus's, Laura's. She always liked talking about being seen. Ethan wanted Marcus to be shameless. A man who knew perfectly well Laura had a husband and stepped in anyway, but the public traces confused him. If Marcus knew, why would he post like someone who believed he was in love with a woman being rescued from an old life? Ethan found a photo Marcus had posted from a restaurant. Laura's face was not visible, only a woman's hand resting beside a wine glass, with no wedding ring. But on her wrist was a thin silver bracelet with a small blue stone, the one Ethan had bought Laura in Seattle for their 10th wedding anniversary. She had cried when she received it. "You remembered the color of my eyes when you bought this?" she had asked then. Ethan had told her he remembered more than she thought. In Marcus's photo, that bracelet lay beside his hand on a restaurant table where low light reflected off the silverware. No ring. Bracelet, as if Laura had taken marriage off, but kept a gift from it, because it looked beautiful in her new role. Ethan continued checking, not like a madman, but like an operations manager tracing a system's failure. Credit card statements, shared calendar, ride history visible in the family email, because Laura had once used their shared computer. A secondary email appeared in autofill while he was searching for the home insurance file, an address he had never seen before. Laurie Bennett. Consulting. Bennett was her maiden name. Inside that email were restaurant bookings, hotel reservations, event tickets, everything attached not to Laura Harris but to Laura Bennett. Ethan sat in his office close to midnight, the screen light falling across the engineering diagrams on the wall, feeling as if someone had taken an eraser and rubbed his last name out of his wife's life. It was not just an affair. Laura had created a single, or nearly single, version of herself, a woman without a ring, using her maiden name with her own schedule, restaurants, hotels, and future. And among the bookings was an email that made his hand go numb. A table for two on the coming Friday night, at the restaurant where Ethan had proposed to Laura 14 years earlier. The restaurant was called the Mercer Room, set inside an old brick building downtown, with a small piano in the corner, low lighting, and tables covered in white cloth. Ethan had knelt there, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped the ring into the dessert plate. Laura had laughed, cried, and said yes before he finished the sentence. Now she had booked a table there with Marcus. That Friday night, Ethan did not go into the restaurant to make a scene. He wore a dark coat, parked 2 blocks away, entered the Mercer Room 20 minutes before the booking, and sat at the bar hidden behind a wooden column, where he could see the dining room through the mirror behind the rows of bottles. The bartender asked what he wanted. He ordered whiskey, but did not drink it. The restaurant was still like his memory, except he had changed. The piano was still in the corner, where an older man played slow jazz. The lights were still low, making everyone's faces prettier and lies look softer. The table near the window where he had proposed had been prepared for two. Laura arrived first. She wore the black dress Ethan had bought her for their anniversary the previous year. The dress she had once said was too beautiful to wear only once, and then leave hanging in the closet. Her hair was loosely pinned, her lips redder than usual, and she wore no ring. Ethan looked at her bare hand as she set her purse on the chair, and for one moment he felt a pain in a very specific place beneath his ribs, like a bruise pressed hard. Marcus arrived 5 minutes later. He walked in with the slight nervousness of a man eager to see the woman he loved, not the manner of a man hiding guilt. Laura stood. Marcus did not kiss her on the mouth right away, only touched her waist and leaned down to say something that made her laugh. That laugh made Ethan colder than all the evidence before it. Not because it was lustful, because it was relieved. Laura looked happy in a way Ethan had not seen in months. She was happy inside the restaurant where he had once believed he had begun a shared life with her. Ethan sat at the bar, listening to fragments of their conversation through distance, through piano notes, through the clinking of glasses. Marcus asked her about papers. Laura said soon. Marcus said, "Once your divorce is final, we can stop sneaking around." Laura placed her hand over his very gently. "I know, I just need a little more time." Ethan watched that hand and understood that Marcus believed in a different story. No one said that if he knew the woman across from him still slept in her husband's bed every night, still let her husband change the oil in her car, still scheduled roof repairs with him, still hosted his mother's birthday party last month, still posted pumpkin patch family photos 3 weeks earlier. Marcus believed Laura was divorcing or separated. He did not know he was sitting in the restaurant where her husband had proposed to her. Ethan left the Mercer Room before dessert. He walked through the light rain back to his car, feeling that his anger no longer had a simple target. He still hated Marcus at some level because Marcus had held his wife's hand, had made her laugh that way, had existed in the space Ethan was not allowed to enter. But hating him like a thief no longer felt accurate. Marcus might also be living inside a story Laura had written. That night, Ethan returned home before Laura. He hung up his coat, washed a clean glass in the sink, then went into his office and sat in front of his laptop. Marcus had a project seeking a small investor, a renovation of an old retail space into a showroom. Ethan had connections in operations, an industrial real estate. Reaching out was not difficult. He used his real work email, introduced himself by saying he had heard about Marcus's project through a mutual contact, and said he might be interested in investing or consulting on the system. He did not mention Laura, did not mention the Mercer Room, did not mention husband. Marcus replied the next morning, polite, interested. After a few emails, Ethan invited him to dinner at his house the following Friday to discuss it privately. Marcus accepted. Laura knew nothing. The week before the dinner was one of the longest weeks of Ethan's life, because he had to live in the same house with Laura as if he were playing the role of a normal husband, while preparing to set the entire stage on a single breaking point. Laura came home after the Mercer Room smelling of rain in her hair and wine on her breath, kissing Ethan on the cheek while he was reading a report in the kitchen. "Long night," she said. "Difficult client?" he asked. She took off her earrings and sighed. "Yeah, people always want more than what they say at the beginning." Ethan watched her set her purse down on the chair, her hand still bare. "Where's your ring?" Laura looked at her hand, then laughed. "I took it off when I washed my hands at the restaurant. It's probably in my bag." "Don't make that face." "What face am I making?" "The face like I just committed a crime." The sentence landed in the kitchen like a joke, unaware of how true it was. Ethan did not answer. During that week, Laura still moved through the house, still made coffee, still asked if he wanted to buy more air filter replacements, still laughed at texts from someone in the living room, still told his mother over the phone that, "We're fine, Ethan is just too busy." Ethan watched her small movements with a growing cold amazement. She was frighteningly good, not because she lied perfectly, but because she lived inside multiple versions of herself without seeming torn. To Ethan, she was the tired wife, sometimes distant but still here. To Marcus, she was a woman on the edge of escaping a dead marriage. To friends, she was Laura, funny, sharp, a little mysterious about her private life, but always able to make everything look beautiful. To family, she was the thoughtful daughter-in-law, the woman who sent cards on time and remembered birthdays. Ethan began to understand that betrayal was not only in who she slept with, or who she had dinner with. It was in the way she had turned reality into a system of rooms, each with its own story, while she held every key. On Friday afternoon, the day Marcus was coming, Ethan told Laura while she was arranging flowers in the kitchen. "We have a guest tonight," Laura frowned. "What guest?" "Someone from the industry. Marcus Reed." The flower shears slipped from her hand and fell into the sink. The sound of metal striking stainless steel was sharp enough that both of them went still. She picked them up too quickly. "Marcus Reed." "Yes. Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "I thought surprise guests were fine." "You've had plenty of surprises lately." Laura looked at him. For the first time in months, Ethan saw her fail to control her face immediately. There was a flash of real panic. "Ethan, this is strange." "Strange how?" "I don't know. You invited a work guest without asking me, and he's someone I may have crossed paths with. You just said you meet a lot of people through work." She set the shears down and wiped her hands on a towel. "What are you doing?" Ethan looked at her for a long time. He wanted to say, "I'm putting your two worlds in the same room," but he only said, "Making dinner." The doorbell rang at 7:12. Laura stood beside the dining table, her face normal again, but her neck slightly red, the way it got whenever she was trying not to shake. Ethan opened the door for Marcus, and when the three of them sat down at the table, Ethan understood that this was no longer revenge. It was an examination. He wanted to know whether Marcus would smile with the arrogance of a man who knew he was eating steak in the husband's house. But Marcus did not smile that way. He sat in the chair on the right, looking at Laura and then at Ethan, his hand resting on the napkin but not opening it yet. Ethan poured the wine. Laura dropped her fork. Marcus bent down to pick it up for her, the reflex too intimate before he caught himself halfway. When his sleeve pulled back, Ethan saw the leather bracelet on Marcus's wrist. It was the same bracelet Laura had claimed she bought for her brother's birthday, though Ethan remembered her brother was allergic to leather and never wore bracelets. He looked at the bracelet, then at Laura. She looked away. Ethan raised his glass. "To honesty," he said, "since we're all adults here." No one laughed. Dinner unfolded like a chess game, where every sound of a knife touching a plate seemed to accuse someone. Ethan served steak, potatoes, arugula salad with parmesan. Laura ate very little. Marcus tried to keep polite by complimenting the food, asking about Ethan's company, talking about the showroom project as if he could still cling to the business purpose and avoid falling into the truth opening beneath his feet. Ethan answered calmly. He asked Marcus about commercial space design, about how people walk into a place and decide what to believe based on light, layout, scent, and sound. Marcus said his industry was essentially about creating a feeling of trust. Ethan set down his knife. "Interesting. Do you believe people can build something real if the foundation starts with a lie?" Marcus looked at him. Laura set her glass down a little too hard. "Ethan, that's a little heavy for dinner," Marcus answered slowly. "Depends who's lying." Ethan nodded. "I think so too." Laura gave a short laugh. "You two sound like you're at an ethics seminar." "Maybe we need one," Ethan said. Marcus looked at Laura again, and this time it was no longer the gaze of a lover startled by surprise, but of a man assembling mismatched pieces. Ethan asked, "Marcus, you've been divorced, right?" Marcus stiffened slightly. "Yes, I'm sorry if that's personal. I suppose you understand the feeling that a marriage doesn't end in one day, but little by little." Laura interrupted. "Ethan, there's really no need to dig into our guest's personal life. He's written publicly about second chances," Ethan said. "I assume he's comfortable with the subject." Marcus looked at Ethan. I believe in second chances, but not if someone uses them to avoid accountability. Laura suddenly stood. I'll get more water, Ethan said. Sit down. There's enough water here. His voice was not loud, but something in it kept her from leaving. Marcus set down his napkin. Laura, he said slowly, you told me he was your ex. The sentence drained the air from the room. Laura closed her eyes for a beat, then opened them with the face of someone preparing to present a new version. Marcus, it's more complicated than that. Ethan almost admired the way she still found an opening line. It's more complicated than that. Not I lied, not he's not my ex, just complicated. Marcus pushed his chair back slightly. You said the marriage was over. Laura looked at Ethan, then at Marcus. Emotionally, it's been over for a long time. I didn't say something false. Ethan looked at her. Strange. I don't remember us being emotionally separated when you threw my birthday party last month and posted our picture with the caption, my person. Laura went pale. Marcus looked at her. Ethan continued. I also don't remember us being separated when we visited my mother 2 weeks ago, or when you sat with me at the clinic because I thought I had a heart issue back in May, or when we booked that Vermont anniversary trip and you canceled because of a client crisis. Laura gripped the edge of the table. You're humiliating me? No, Ethan said. I'm asking exactly when you turned me into your ex. I'd like to update my calendar. Marcus half stood and sat down again, as if his body did not know whether to leave or stay and hear the rest. Laura said to Marcus, I tried to tell you. I told you the papers weren't done. I told you Ethan had trouble accepting it. Marcus gave a bitter laugh, losing his politeness for the first time. You told me he knew. You told me he was only staying in the house until the finances were sorted. Ethan looked at Marcus. And she told me you were a client who texted a little beyond the line. Marcus turned toward Ethan. The two men looked at each other across the dinner table. And in that moment, they were no longer simply husband and lover. They were two witnesses to the same system of lies, standing at opposite ends of the maze. Laura understood that before either of them said another word. She pushed her chair back. I'm not going to sit here and let two men put me on trial. Ethan opened the drawer of the sideboard behind him, took out a thin gray folder, and placed it on the table. You sat between two stories for months. You can sit 10 more minutes beside the truth. The folder was not thick, because Ethan did not want to become a madman in his own eyes. He had chosen only what was clear enough. A screenshot of the message, one day we won't have to hide. The Mercer room booking. Hotel statements. A screenshot of the secondary Laura Bennett email. A photo of Laura and Marcus at the restaurant. Her hand without a ring but wearing the silver bracelet Ethan had bought. Ride history. A timeline of Thursday nights. A printed copy of Marcus's post saying, finally found someone who understands second chances. Ethan opened each page, not throwing, not slamming, only placing them down in order like an operations report. Laura immediately chose her familiar line of attack. You followed me? Ethan nodded faintly. I gathered evidence after my wife lied. You invaded my privacy. You don't get to build a second life and call the evidence an invasion. Marcus picked up a page, looked at the Laura Bennett email at her maiden name. Laura Bennett, he said quietly, you told me you were using that again because you were reclaiming yourself after the divorce. Laura looked at him, tears beginning to appear. I was reclaiming myself. I just didn't know how to leave. Ethan looked at those tears and remembered every time they had once softened him. This time he only saw their structure. Marcus took out his phone. If we're telling the truth, he said, his voice turning hoarse, I have some things too. Laura turned to him immediately. Marcus, don't. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Don't what? Don't do to you what you did to me. He opened the messages. Ethan did not want to look, but Marcus pushed the phone onto the table. The divorce is almost final. He knows we're done. I'm only staying until the house sells. I've been alone in that marriage for years. He can be controlling when he feels rejected. The last sentence chilled Ethan in a different way. Marcus said, she told me I shouldn't contact you, that you weren't stable, that you might scare her if you were triggered. Once I suggested meeting you to clear things up, because I didn't want to be some coward hiding behind another man's back, and she cried for almost an hour, saying I'd put her in danger. Ethan looked at Laura, not only because she had cheated, not only because she had said the marriage was dead. She had turned him into a threat in another man's story, so she could keep Marcus away from the truth. The man who had once driven 3 hours through a snowstorm to pick up her mother after a canceled flight. The man who had sat beside her hospital bed after gallbladder surgery. The man who had never raised his voice at her, even during their worst fights. In her story, he was controlling, dangerous, unstable. Laura truly cried then, Ethan thought, but real tears did not save the lie. I was afraid, she said. I was afraid that if you two talked, everything would explode. Marcus laughed bitterly. No, you were afraid that if we talked, everything would make sense. Ethan asked Marcus, did she borrow money from you? Laura looked at Ethan as if he had opened a door she had hoped no one would see. Marcus was silent for a few seconds. Yes, legal fees. She said the lawyer needed a retainer for the divorce. Ethan took out another statement. Meanwhile, our joint money paid for hotels, restaurants, and a Milwaukee trip, she said, was a conference. Marcus looked at Laura. This time his eyes were not wounded by lost love, but by the realization that he, too, had been an account, a resource, a role in the plan. You told me you needed my help to get out, Marcus said. Laura shook her head, tears running down. I did need help. I wasn't lying about how I felt. Ethan answered, you lied about everything around that feeling so you could turn it into money, time, and sympathy. The room was so quiet they could hear the candles crackle. Marcus took the leather bracelet off his wrist and placed it on the table. Your wife said you wouldn't understand her, he said to Ethan. I think we both understand her now. Laura looked at the bracelet as if looking at a piece of stage scenery being taken down. She had given it to Marcus as proof that he had been chosen, while telling Ethan it was a gift for her brother. One small object, 2 stories, a whole life in miniature. After Marcus stood and prepared to leave, Laura turned to the final tears, the kind no longer meant to deny, but to keep whoever could still be kept. She followed him into the living room, saying his name in a voice Ethan had once believed only he heard on difficult nights. Marcus, please. I was wrong, but I wasn't pretending with you. Part of me was real when I was with you. Marcus stopped at the door, his hand on the knob, face white. Which part, he asked, the part that said I was your second chance? Or the part that said he was dangerous? The part that borrowed money from me? Or the part that let me think I was saving you? Laura turned toward Ethan. Ethan, I got lost. I know it sounds like an excuse, but I was lonely in this marriage for so long that I didn't know what I was doing anymore. I never wanted to hurt anyone. Ethan stood in the dining room doorway, looking at the table still full of cooling food, low-burning candles, untouched red wine. No, he said, you wanted to keep us both. Marcus looked at Ethan, then at Laura. And you did, he said, until we sat at the same table. Laura covered her mouth and cried. 6 months earlier, Ethan might have stepped toward her. He might have put a hand on her shoulder, even angry, because he could not bear to see her hurt. Marcus had probably done the same in some apartment, in some restaurant, in some parking lot, when she told him she was trapped. But tonight, her tears no longer had one separate man to pull in. Her 2 versions had collided and shattered both mirrors. Marcus opened the door. Before he left, he turned back to Ethan. I'm sorry, he said, not for loving her, for believing her. Ethan nodded. It was not reconciliation, not friendship, only 2 men giving each other the smallest recognition that they had stood at opposite ends of the same lie. When the door closed, the house became so quiet Ethan could hear a single cube of ice fall into the tray inside the refrigerator. Laura sat down on the sofa like someone exhausted after a performance that had lasted too long. Ethan returned to the dining room and began clearing the plates. That gesture frightened her more than any shouting would have. What are you doing? She asked, clearing the table. Ethan, please don't be like this. Don't be so cold. He placed the knife in the sink. What do you want me to do? Smash something. Scream so you can tell people I'm as frightening as you told Marcus I was. She stood. I didn't mean it like that. You wrote it. I was trying to explain how I felt. No, you were building a version of me bad enough that you wouldn't have to see yourself clearly. Laura cried again. Can you forgive me? Ethan looked at her for a long time. This was the woman he had married, the woman who had once danced barefoot in the living room when they bought this house, the woman who had stayed awake all night when his mother was sick, the woman who had laughed until she cried when Ethan burned their first Valentine's dinner, the woman who had created a false world with another man and cast Ethan as the obstacle. Which version of you am I supposed to forgive? He asked. The question silenced her. He took off his wedding ring, did not throw it, did not slam it down, only placed it on the dining table beside the folder, beside the leather bracelet Marcus had left behind. Gold ring, leather bracelet, papers, all lying under candlelight like artifacts left after a fire. Tomorrow, Ethan said, we call a lawyer. The weeks after that dinner brought no sense of victory. Laura moved into a temporary apartment within 10 days. But before leaving, she tried once more to control the story. She texted friends saying Ethan had set her up by inviting Marcus to the house to humiliate her, that Marcus had taken advantage of her vulnerable period, that the marriage with Ethan had been cold for a long time, but he refused to accept. Her family initially defended her with familiar phrases about how no one knows what happens inside someone else's home, about Ethan being so calm it's frightening, about men sometimes failing to see their wife's loneliness until it was too late. Ethan posted nothing. He did not air the drama online. He did not write vague lines for people to guess at. He only sent what was necessary to his lawyer. To a few relatives Laura had pulled into the story, and once to her brother when the man called Ethan at midnight, furious, telling him he was cruel for emotionally torturing Laura. Ethan sent screenshots of Laura telling Marcus that he was dangerous, proof that she had borrowed money from Marcus for legal fees, and the hotel booking history under the Laura Bennett email. Her brother did not call again. Marcus also sent one very short group message to Ethan and a few relevant people when Laura tried to say Marcus had known everything from the beginning. I was told Ethan was her ex and that the divorce was nearly final. I was also told not to contact him because he was unstable. I now know those things were false. There was no extra language. Marcus's restraint drained the air out of Laura's story. Mutual friends began to go quiet. Not everyone turned toward Ethan. Real life was rarely that clean. Some avoided them both. Some said, "What a sad situation," and disappeared. Some still felt sorry for Laura because she knew how to look broken. But the image of a woman trapped in a cold marriage was no longer intact. Evidence did what emotion could not. It stood still. Ethan also began individual therapy, not because he wanted a beautiful, healing journey, but because he realized the most dangerous thing after betrayal was not missing the person who betrayed you, but losing faith in your own ability to recognize truth. In the first session, he asked the therapist, "Was I stupid?" The woman looked at him and said, "No. You trusted the person who was supposed to be worthy of that trust." That sentence did not heal him, but it took one stone off his neck. He stayed in the house alone after Laura left. The house was quieter, but not exactly easier. The dining table reminded him of the dinner. He cleaned everything like a ritual of ending. The plates were washed and put away. The tablecloth had a wine stain. He did not try to remove it, only folded it and put it in a trash bag. Candles had melted low, and he threw them away. He placed the leather bracelet Marcus had left behind into an envelope with the folder, not knowing what to do with it, except that he could not yet throw it out. His wedding ring lay in the office drawer. He changed the locks, closed the joint account, canceled the secondary card, removed Laura's name from several household services. Each small action was practical and brutal at once, like taking screws out of a house he had thought would stand until they were old. Some nights he stood in the bedroom, looking at the empty half of the closet Laura had left behind, and remembered the smell of her perfume, remembered the way she complained when he put socks in the wrong basket, remembered her voice calling Ethan from downstairs. He did not remember because he wanted her back. He remembered because truth does not erase habit immediately. A false life can still contain real mornings, real laughter, real embraces, and that is why it is so hard to bury. About a month later, Marcus sent Ethan one final message. "I hope you find peace. I'm trying to do the same." Ethan looked at that message longer than he expected. He did not answer right away. Finally, he wrote, "I hope your daughter never has to learn trust this way." Marcus replied, "Me too." Then they did not speak again. A year later, Ethan hosted a small dinner in that same house, not to reclaim the dining room through some symbolic act, because Ethan no longer believed in the clean scenes of release people liked in movies. He invited only 4 real friends, people who had not forced him to retell the story before he was ready, who did not ask, "Are you over it yet?" as if betrayal were the flu, who did not try to make Laura a monster just to make him feel better. He cooked more simply than he had the year before. No white tablecloth, no low candles, no perfect steak, just pasta, salad, garlic bread, enough wine. The dining room was the same, but the light was different because Ethan had replaced the hanging fixture after Laura moved out. The chair Marcus had sat in was still there, because Ethan did not want to live by removing every object that had witnessed his pain. At one point during the dinner, when everyone laughed at a story that did not matter, Ethan looked at that chair and remembered the night Marcus walked into his house without knowing who he was, remembered Laura dropping the fork, remembered the sentence, "You told me he was your ex." remembered the leather bracelet lying beside his wedding ring. He did not feel entirely light. He did not feel victorious, but he no longer felt as foolish as before. He understood that Marcus had not taken Laura from him. Marcus had only believed in a version of Laura she had built, just as Ethan had believed in another version. The true enemy was not the man sitting at the other end of the table. The true enemy was the system of lies Laura had built, room by room, sentence by sentence, tier by tier. Every time she turned suspicion into someone else's guilt. After dinner, when his friends had left, Ethan stood alone in the dining room, clearing glasses and plates. Outside the window, the neighborhood was still peaceful. The grass was still neatly cut. The porch lights still glowed warm. From the outside, his house probably looked stable too. But Ethan knew that the appearance of peace was no longer something he trusted easily. He turned off the dining room light, walked through the living room, and stopped in front of the office drawer where the folder still lay. He did not open it. He did not need to. He only rested his hand on the wood for a second, as if confirming that the truth was still there, not letting it devour his life, but not pretending it had never happened. When someone lives by lies, they do not betray just one person. They create an entire false world, place other people in roles they never agreed to play, and eventually get crushed by the world they built. Laura had lost Ethan, lost Marcus, lost control of the story. But her loss did not make Ethan whole again. He still lived, he still worked, still cooked, still laughed with friends, but some part of him had become quieter, slower. No longer walking into love like stepping into a house full of light without checking the foundation. He had invited his wife's lover to dinner because he wanted to face the man who had taken her from him. But by the end of that night, he understood Marcus had taken nothing. Laura had simply lied to both of them until there was no part of her left that either man could love without betraying himself.